I'm a 22-year-old woman, and about a month ago, I was searching for a couch for my new apartment on Craigslist. After scrolling through countless listings, I finally found something that seemed like a great deal. The couch looked perfect in the pictures, almost new, and the price was surprisingly low. However, something about the listing fell off. The seller had provided a strange email address for contact, something bizarre that didn't sit right with me. But despite the oddity, I decided to ignore my gut feeling and sent the man a message with my offer. Within minutes, I received a response. The seller accepted my offer without any negotiation, which already felt too good to be true. But then he asked for my home address so he could deliver the couch. That request immediately made me uncomfortable. I didn't like the idea of a stranger knowing where I lived, so I suggested that I could come to his house to pick up the couch instead. But he was adamant, insisting over and over that it would be easier for him to deliver it to my place. His insistence made me uneasy, so I stopped responding. The next day, he emailed me again, this time providing his address and urging me to come by. By this point, I was torn. The couch still seemed like a great deal, but something about the whole situation felt off. Despite my reservations, the thought of getting such a good deal won out, and I decided to check it out. According to the address he provided, he lived just a short drive away, so I got in my van and headed over. As I approached the house, I noticed that it was smaller and more rundown than the other homes in the neighborhood. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint was peeling off the exterior. When I rang the doorbell, a middle-aged man answered the door. He was wearing a baseball cap that cast a shadow over his face, but I could still see the wide, almost unsettling smile that greeted me. He invited me inside, and though I was already feeling uneasy, I followed him into the living room where the couch was. The moment I saw the couch, my heart sank. It was nothing like the pictures. The fabric was worn, with visible scuff marks and small tears all over. It looked like it had seen better days, far from the pristine condition the ad had shown. I pointed this out, and he just shrugged, offering to lower the price. When I declined and said I wasn't interested, his demeanor changed. As I turned to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and lingering. He leaned in closer and said in a low voice, "You can have it for free, if you're willing to give me something in return." His tone made my skin crawl. I pulled away, disgusted, and bolted for the door, not bothering to look back as I rushed out of the house and into my van. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, but I managed to start the engine and drive away as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed trying to calm my nerves, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps on my front porch. My heart began to race. I muted the TV and strained to listen. The sound of someone fiddling with my front doorknob sent a wave of terror through me. I crept out of bed and tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole, but whoever it was had already vanished. Then I heard it, the creaking of the gate to my backyard. My blood ran cold as I realized someone was trying to get into my house. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I told the operator what was happening. Moments later, I heard someone jiggling the back door's doorknob. I shouted through the door that the police were on their way, and just as quickly as it started, the sound stopped. The gate creaked open and shut again, and then there was nothing but silence. The police arrived shortly after, but there was no sign of the intruder. They'd searched the area but found nothing. It's been a month since that night, and nothing has happened since, but I still can't shake the feeling of dread. I'm almost certain it was the man from the house. He must have followed me home. I've stopped using Craigslist altogether, and I'm now looking for a new apartment, hoping to leave this nightmare behind. I was on the hunt for a car for my son's 18th birthday, scouring the usual websites like Cars.com and eBay Motors. But everything was either too expensive or too far away. Eventually, I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a hidden gem. After a week of searching, I stumbled upon what seemed like the perfect deal, a 2003 Toyota Camry with only 67,000 miles, no accidents, and in good condition for just $3,500. It was almost too good to be true. The seller, who introduced himself as Bob, lived about 10 miles from my home, a manageable distance. I called him up, and he sounded normal enough on the phone, assuring me that the car was in excellent condition. We arranged a time for me to come check it out, and I brought along $3,500 in cash, planning to negotiate the price down if possible. I arrived at Bob's property about 15 minutes early. It was a small house on a sizable lot, far removed from the nearest neighbors. The garage was open, so I walked over, expecting to see the car inside, but it was empty except for an assortment of car parts scattered around. The only vehicle in sight was an old pickup truck. Confused, I walked up to the front door, double-checking the house number. It was the right address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked. I knocked for 5 minutes straight, but there was no answer. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone and dialed Bob's number. To my surprise, I heard a phone ringing from inside the house. Now I was certain he was home, but still, no one came to the door. Determined to find out what was going on, I decided to peek through one of the windows. The house was dark inside, with only the faintest light illuminating a small part of the room. I could make out an old-fashioned dining room set, but then my eyes landed on something else. A figure standing by the back door, facing away from me. I assumed it was Bob, so I knocked on the window, hoping to get his attention, but he didn't move. He just stood there, eerily still. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to walk around to the backyard to see if I could get his attention from there. There was no fence or gate, just an open yard leading to the back door. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. Something about the figure seemed off. When I got close enough to see clearly, I realized why. The figure wasn't moving because it wasn't alive. It was a taxidermy human, posed to look as though it was staring out the back door. The sight was so shocking that I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I jumped into my car and sped off, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time. The blinds on the window I had peeked through were now shut, but through a small gap, I could see two of the blinds been open, as if someone was watching me leave. I floored the gas pedal all the way home, not stopping for anything. The whole situation made no sense. There was no Toyota Camry, just an old pickup truck and a garage full of car parts. The taxidermy figure standing at the back door haunted my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been watching me wasn't planning on selling me a car. I was lucky to have gotten out of there when I did. If I had stayed any longer, I might have ended up as another lifeless figure in that man's house, staring out into the backyard forever. About a year ago, I was looking to buy an iPhone 5 on Craigslist. My old phone was on its last legs, and I didn't want to spend too much on a replacement. After browsing through listings, I found someone selling an iPhone 5 for just $200. The seller claimed it was in mint condition and that he was only selling it because he wanted to upgrade to the iPhone 5C. I wasn't very tech savvy, so I asked my younger brother to come along with me to check out the phone. He knew a lot more about smartphones and could help me make sure everything was in working order. We agreed to meet the seller in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot halfway between our locations. It was around 10 o'clock at night when we arrived. Two large, intimidating men stepped out of a black Honda Civic and walked over to us. One of them pulled out the phone and handed it to me. It looked flawless, not a scratch on it. My brother popped my SIM card into the new phone and did some testing, confirming that it was working as promised. But then the seller suddenly asked for $250, even though the ad had listed the price as $200. I hesitated, telling him I only brought $200 with me. He seemed annoyed but didn't push it further. In reality, I had the extra $50, but I didn't want to spend more than the original asking price. I figured this was his way of trying to get more money out of me at the last minute. I handed him the $200, and the two men got back into their car. My brother and I returned to our vehicle, and I started testing the phone more thoroughly, making a call to my girlfriend to ensure everything was working. We stayed in the parking lot for about 5 minutes, but my brother pointed out that the two men hadn't left yet either. Feeling uneasy, I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. That's when I noticed the black Honda Civic pulling out right behind us. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming they were just leaving at the same time. But as I continued driving, it became clear that they were following us. Every turn I made, they were right behind me, keeping a close distance. My brother suggested pulling over to see what they wanted, but I wasn't about to take that risk. The more I drove, the more erratic my driving became, trying to lose them. I switched lanes, took sudden turns, but nothing worked. They stayed on my tail the entire time. I knew they were looking for trouble, but I had no idea what they wanted. As we approached an intersection, the light turned red. I made a split-second decision and floored it through the intersection, narrowly avoiding oncoming traffic. My brother shouted at me, calling me reckless, but it worked. The Honda Civic didn't follow. We continued home, my heart racing, every nerve on edge. When we finally got home, I felt the sense of relief wash over me. I thought the ordeal was over. But later that night, as I was setting up my new phone, I heard the unmistakable sound of two car doors slamming shut outside. My blood ran cold as I looked out the window and saw the black Honda Civic parked across the street. I immediately woke up my dad, explaining the situation as fast as I could. He grabbed a baseball bat and crouched behind the front door waiting. A loud knock echoed through the house, and my dad shouted for them to leave. One of the men outside claimed to have a gun and threatened to shoot the lock off the door if we didn't open up. My dad told me to call Joe, our neighbor who was a police officer. I called him, and he said he'd be over immediately. Just as I hung up the phone, I heard the muffled sound of a gunshot. A bullet had pierced the front door, missing my dad's head by mere inches. Panic set in as my dad ran from the door. We all huddled in the hallway listening. Moments later, we heard Joe's voice outside, ordering the men to drop their weapons. My dad rushed outside to help as Joe apprehended the two men. That night was the scariest experience of my life, but it was also a moment of intense relief. If Joe hadn't arrived when he did, things could have ended very differently. I got my phone, but at a much higher cost than I ever anticipated. The memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder that some deals are better left alone. Love creepy stories? Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Our email is in the description. Please send in your horror stories.